Yay. Okay.
Right.
Well, first
Just make sure
things
I'm in focus.
first. You know, I know your name, but we like to cover it just so we don't do anything wrong when we do a graphic. Will you kind of just say your name and spell it out for us?
Yeah, especially spelling and saying it. The name is Xiomaro. The X is pronounced like an S, so it's Xiomaro.
Amazing.
And by the way, when you're doing the interview, look at her.
Look at her.
Don't
yes.
look at this.
Yeah. That's right. Thanks for reminding me.
I got you.
And that's your first and last.
Yes.
Okay.
I'm like, I was going to say Madonna, but that's too old. But any artist, it goes by one name.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just easier.
And would you just share with us your title that you go by?
I am an artist. It's the broadest term because I'm mostly known for photography, but I also do music. And I have authored a book that's out there on Amazon. It's not a self-published book, it's by a publisher. And I have another one coming out this year on New York City street photography. And then I have another one coming out the year after. So I like to do writing as well. So that's why if I just say artist, I think it covers it all. Also, if I say photographer, then people start asking me, do you do weddings and bar mitzvahs? So they don't see photography as an art in many cases. So it's just better to use that word.
Artist.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. My first question, you know, after kind of learning about your work, I wanted to kind of ask you how you got represented by Hayes Gallery.
Yeah, getting representation by a gallery is not easy. You know, it's really hard. They have to make money. So they are generally going to work with artists who are dead already, and I'm not dead yet, and artists who are famous, and I'm certainly not super famous. So, but that's what they look for so they can make money. This particular gallery in Berlin, Germany, put out an announcement that they were looking for new talent. And you don't see that too much. And they were looking for people to do things a little bit in an unusual way. So I figured, well, let me just give it a shot and submit a portfolio, submit my bio and credentials, and just see what happens. And to my surprise, they got back to me pretty quick. And they said, you know, we want to take you on. We think you have a different vision. The gallery owner, Irina Rasinovich, she didn't know this about me yet, I don't think, but it turns out that, like me, she also had cancer. And in having cancer, that kind of, it kind of turned her direction towards what she really wanted to do in life. And so the gallery was doing that and discovering new artists. And when I got cancer, it kind of did the same thing for me. I was a music lawyer before that. And then I decided to devote my life to my own artwork. So it was kind of nice having that personal connection. But the photographs that I sent her were photographs that I took in New York City. I used to work there. I mean, I'm still there a lot, but I used to be there every single day. And so during my commute, I would just take photographs on Times Square, 6th Avenue, all these different places that I would traverse on my way to work and going back home. And so these are photographs that are mostly candid. And the photographs are of just all the unusual things that I encounter in New York City. There are people with interesting clothes, sometimes no clothes, people with interesting hairstyles. You get people from around the world, of course, the tourists. And lots of times it's about how things come together. Sometimes you have a person wearing a certain color shirt, and for a split second they happen to walk by a bouquet of flowers of the same color. And if you're quick and you catch it, and you try to compose it real quick without them noticing, you get a very compelling image, and that's part of the challenge of taking those photographs.
Right. And would you say those photos you take in New York are most of what you kind of send to them?
Well, I probably have about, at this point in time, over a 10-year period, about 1,000 photographs from New York City. So what I did was, I picked the ones that I thought were the strongest, but also the ones that I thought conveyed an overall theme. And this way, when I submitted it, I was able to accompany it with a summary, what these photos were about and why I took them. So that's generally what you do. You pare it down to the ones that you think fit well together. It's just like putting together an exhibit. You know, you can't have everything up. But fortunately, because I did have a lot of photographs, I had a lot to choose from. And so I was able to put something that was cohesive. Because when I'm shooting on the street, since I don't know what to expect, and also there's not a lot of time to think, you know, I'm kind of shooting instinctively. Sometimes it's not until afterward that you realize what the photos mean to you subconsciously. So that's what I ended up doing. A lot of the photos that I sent to her really center around, for me anyway, the theme of identity. You know, who are we? What do we mean? You know, growing up Latino, sometimes you don't always fit in because there's a difference in language and culture. And so in a lot of the photos that I took, it seems to me like it conveyed these ideas about finding your identity. Sometimes it gives you the impression that the subject in the photograph feels alienated from their surroundings. Just by way of example, there's a couple of photos I took where there's a reflection off of a store window. And so it's reflecting a billboard from across the street, of which there are many in Times Square. And just in that split second, you have this picture of a person, and then above their head, it's almost like there's a thought bubble floating above their head, almost suggesting what they're thinking about. And in some cases, the thought bubble is in juxtaposition to who they are. So it just gives you a reason to ponder, you know, what does this photo mean? It's more than just having a photograph that's pretty to look at or that's well composed, but the idea is that there's a thought in there that it might provoke out of you. And, you know, 10 people can look at the picture and come away with 10 different ideas on what it is. So that was a series that I submitted to Hayes Gallery, and apparently they bought into it, so I'm glad for that.
And, you know, we're here at Weir Farm. Would you kind of give us a quick explanation of maybe what this place means to you or what it's brought you?
Yeah, Weir Farm National Historical Park. It straddles the towns of Wilton and Richfield, Connecticut. And really it means everything to me because after I had cancer and recovered from it, I knew that I wanted to pursue something in the arts. Music is really difficult to do because you have to work, at least for the kind of music I do, which is hard rock, you need a band. And there's always somebody in the band who's not gonna pull their weight, and there's fighting and there's all that drama. And with photography, it's just me, you know, I do it, and if I want to stay up all night and get it done, I can do it. But I didn't have a path. I didn't have a way of how to get from point A to point B. And by sheer chance, I got an email from the AAA, Automobile Association of America, and they suggested Weir Farm as a place for a day trip, and I had never heard of it. And I studied painting in college, and I never knew who Julian Alden Weir was. Julian Alden Weir was one of the prominent founders of American Impressionist painting, and he lived here and he hung out with his famous friends, and they took, you know, they just went out into this landscape and they did paintings that you can now see in world-class museums like the Metropolitan Museum of Art. So when I came to visit, the ranger said that they have an artist in residence program. And I never heard of that before, but apparently you apply. If you get accepted, you get to live in a historical cottage here in the park for a month. You can do whatever you want and, you know, just explore your own aesthetic in the arts. They even set up an exhibit for you and everything. So I applied, not thinking that I would get accepted because I didn't have the credentials that they typically look for. You know, they usually, a lot of the previous artists in residence had PhDs in art. They were teachers. They had long exhibit records. I had none of that. So I applied. I figured, let me just do it because you never know, and it's good experience to get into the application process. And to my amazement, I actually got accepted. I lived across the street for a month. There's a historical house over there. This is the Weir house right behind me. So this is where Julian Alden Weir and his family lived. But I was here for a month, and that month changed everything. Because then I had a month without any distractions to really focus on what I'm doing and not just create a body of work, which is based on Weir Farm, but to think about what I really want to do and how do I go from here. So I took pictures of the park, and some months later the park asked me if I could basically do a project for them and photograph this formally so that they can use it to promote the park and have some documentary, documentary images of these different historical architecture and the landscape. So I did all that. They were very well received. They were exhibited heavily. I acquired a lot of media attention on those photographs. Senator Lieberman, who was the senator at the time, and he's the one who introduced the legislation to establish this place as a park. He also exhibited the pictures at his office in Washington, D.C. And just one thing led to another after that. All of a sudden I had some momentum. Other parks started contacting me to ask me to do the same thing for them. I eventually had a book that came out also on Weir Farm. You know, you can see that on Amazon and on my website. But all of a sudden I had a path and I had a career. It was nothing that I ever expected would happen because, you know, I never did this kind of photography before. And I think over time I got better at it. There was a lot of experimentation when I first started doing this. So I'm very grateful for the park because, again, I didn't have the kind of credentials that you typically would see. And yet they had enough faith and confidence in me to, you know, to have me do this for them. So I'm very grateful, and that's why when we set up this interview, I asked that we do it here because this really is a starting point for me. And it is so appropriate too because this is really what this park is about. There's, my hair's all over the place here. There's about at least 440 national parks that I know of. Maybe I'm probably off on my numbers. But out of all those parks in the country, this is the only one that's dedicated to the arts, specifically American painting. And when Weir was here, this was like an incubator for the arts. You know, people would come here and stay for a while and not be distracted by things and develop their painting. If you come here when the weather's a lot warmer than it is right now, you'll see many people painting and taking pictures. So to me, it's just so appropriate that here we are in, you know, the 21st century, and it's still perpetuating that tradition. And I'm one of the benefactors of that. So yes, I'm very grateful for Weir Farm.
Right, I think it's so cool how your story kind of grows from right here.
It does. Everything really emanates from here. I have a relationship with the park where it's just a title, but I'm called their visiting artist. And so I visit here as often as I can and have been since, I already lost track of time, but 13 years I think it's been now. And I tell everybody about it. And so I have a good relationship with the, you know, with the park officials here. And also they have a Weir Farm Arts Center, which is it's not a governmental agency, it's a private organization. But they're the ones who run the Artist in Residence program. And so I also stay in touch with them. And also all the other parks I've worked with. I've worked with Sagamore Hill National Historic Site, which is the home and the summer White House for President Theodore Roosevelt. I've photographed the home of Longfellow, the poet. That's in Cambridge, Massachusetts, right off of Harvard. And that was also, previous to Longfellow owning the home, it was the headquarters for George Washington during the Revolutionary War. So I photographed that. I photographed George Washington's headquarters in New Jersey. And this spring I'm starting a project for the National Park Service where I'm photographing Washington's birthplace in Virginia. So again, one thing leads to another. They're all related historically in one way or another. But then I have this other thing on the side, which is completely different, which is the street photography in Manhattan. And to me it is related because what I'm basically doing is documenting contemporary life for a future generation that will look back at it. And for them it will be history. And they're gonna say, hey, remember back in the 2000s when people were using their cell phones and now we have it implanted in our brains? That's what I imagine it will be like.
You kind of went over a few things, but I wanted to kind of ask you if you have any plans on new work, new art. What may be in the works for you?
Yeah, well, there is that Washington's Birthplace project, which I'll be starting in the spring, as I mentioned. There is another book that one book is coming out later this year on New York City street photography. That's already done. It's publisher has the manuscript, so they just got to print the book. I am doing another one. Photos are done, I just have to write the book. This will come out next year. And this one's on wildwood, Wildwood is in New Jersey. It's a seaside resort. It has a lot of architecture that's called Googie. I don't know if you ever heard of that, but Googie is this very 50s, early 60s type of architecture. It's very space age. You all are probably too young to know this, but there used to be a cartoon series called The Jetsons. And if you ever look at that, you'll see this Googie style architecture. It's very retro in a futuristic kind of a way. So most books out there will focus on the architecture of these motels that they have in Wildwood, New Jersey. And I'm certainly doing that too, but I'm taking it to another level. And what I'm doing is I'm photographing what life is like in this resort. And so it's a very unique audience that I think comes there. A lot of it is working class folks from New Jersey, but also from Philadelphia, which is nearby. Many of them would be MAGA people, I would describe. So they have a certain aesthetic as far as their dress and their behavior and the things that interest them. They're really into cars, it seems. I mean, I'm overgeneralizing, so obviously this is not true for everyone. But there is a distinct culture that I perceive there, and I'm just documenting that. And you'll see when you walk on the boardwalk along the beach, they have all these little concession stands with T-shirts. And I would say a vast majority of the T-shirts are political. They're either political or they're sexual in nature, you know? And the political stuff tends to be very MAGA oriented. So I wanted to document this period of time, especially considering everything that's going on. And again, these are the kinds of pictures that go above and beyond the obvious interesting beauty of the place, which is this Googie style architecture. I wanted to go a little deeper about it. So I think that's what gives it a historical component. 20 years from now, we'll look back at that and we'll take it a different way than we take it now.
So your books are kind of that, are coming out, and the one that's focused on New Jersey. These are more of historical books with pictures that show what the culture is like now?
Correct. So because they're contemporary pictures, the historical aspect is probably not going to be as prominent because we are living in it, So it's going to seem kind of ordinary. But what I do is I try to take pictures of the architecture. They have their own type of interesting people that's different to what you encounter in Manhattan. Manhattan is more liberal politically, but it's also more cosmopolitan because you have a lot of diversity there in terms of ethnicity and languages, and also you have the tourists. So it's got its own look and its own vibe. When you go to Wildwood, it's very, very different. It's a whole different part of the country and a different mindset too. So I found interest in people and what they found interesting that's different from what I would find interesting. And so I try to document that in my photos that are also very candid in nature. But I think that as time goes by, we look back and it looks interesting. I mean, think about it with photography, right? So I grew up with film cameras, but I'm all digital. People half my age, people probably your age, a lot of them are into film because it's interesting. It's historical, it's different. You have the same thing in music with vinyl records, right? People just think it's just amazing. You put this needle, it's analog, it's physical. You scratch the record, you got to be careful. You have the album cover. There's a charm and there's an interest in that because it's so different from contemporary life, right? Where everything's on your phone. So this book, I would imagine, as time goes by, it ages well, hopefully, like a wine. And as we start moving more into the future, we're going to see those pictures and it's going to be like, wow. I mean, I can't believe that's what things were like back then. It's a good thing these pictures exist to remind us of what it's like. That particular town in Wildwood, a lot of that architecture is being destroyed. They're taking it down, they're putting up modern structures, and there's a lot of controversy about that because you have preservationists who want to keep that. They feel like it's the character of their community. So in many cases, in the future, some of the pictures I take of the hotels are not going to be around anymore. In fact, some of the photos that I took, they date back to 2009. And from 2009 till now, I see that some of the hotel architecture and their signage, it's not around anymore, just in that relatively short period of time.
So do you kind of feel like it's kind of a big responsibility to be taking these photos where these things could be destroyed? Or
Yeah, because we're not going to see them in any other way. And you know, there's certainly lots of photos in existence out there, you know, of these structures, which is why I didn't want to just make the book only about that. I wanted to also cover the people. But at the same time, everyone has their own way of approaching a photograph. And so I like to think that, you know, I have my own unique vision as an artist. So I may take it in a way it's a little bit different than how other people have taken the photograph. Many people, when they photograph a place, they photograph it to establish this is the place. Mm-hmm. So you'll see the structure dead on, right? I don't always photograph that way. Sometimes I photograph, like I have a photograph of a sign, you know, one of these very interesting Googie style signs. Googie, by the way, is Googie, Googie. And if you search that online, you'll see it. It's not just in Wildwood. You also have it in California. That's where it originated from. And you'll see it in other places. But anyway, like I'll have a photograph where if this is the frame, the sign is off to the corner. And all this is sky with very dramatic clouds. So it's just a different way of looking at it and appreciating it. And sometimes when you take something and you remove it from the overall structure, it forces you to look at that particular part of it more intensely, and you get a different appreciation for it. When I photographed this house behind me, I did the same thing. There's a lot of interior shots that I took of this house, and sometimes I'm just focusing on one little piece of something. It might be because of the texture, it might be because of the colors or the craftsmanship and how something was made. I have pictures of just the doorknobs in there. And you figure, what's the big deal with a doorknob? But for me, I just thought it was interesting that that doorknob was the very same thing that Weir and all these famous painters put their hand on. And I wanted to see that up close. I wanted to see the texture and the detail in it. And also when you go on a tour, you're overwhelmed. There's so much to look at. You're listening to the ranger giving you, you know, the information about the place. If I take a picture, I isolate everything. And then you can really focus on it. So with the Wildwood pictures, I do the same thing. When people are there walking on the boardwalk, they're just enjoying themselves, they're listening to the music, they're looking at this, that, and the other thing. There's the beach over there. But with a frame, right, I can isolate. When you take a picture, it's more than just what you're photographing, but it's what you're choosing not to photograph or not to film. And so that draws your attention. And in a way, it's almost like people are experiencing, you know, the photograph or whatever it is that I'm visiting. It's almost like they're experiencing it through my eyes.
right.
You know, so it's almost like you are embedding yourself in another person and you're experiencing it vicariously. So there's a lot of elements like that that I like to talk about when I write a book. So it's more than just a little...
I don't know if you said, but do you know the dates where, you know, these two are coming out?
Oh, the first book, it's called Street Photography of New York City. And the subtitle of it is called Street Haunting. I think that's the title of it, I forget now. Street Haunting. It's based on an essay by Virginia Woolf, of all people. She wrote an essay called Street Haunting. And it's about how she wandered through London, kind of like a ghost, haunting and watching people and studying them. And it inspired her own writing. And so I love that title because that's basically what I'm doing. But that particular book will be coming out, would be in the fall of this year, 2025, probably around October, November. I'm not really sure yet. It still has to go, the editor still has to look at it, make sure I didn't misspell anything. But that's when they're planning it for. The Wildwood book, my manuscript is due at the end of July of 2025. And so I imagine that will probably come out in the spring of 2026, more or less. So those will be out there. And then the Weir Farm book that I wrote, it's called Weir Farm National Historic Site, not historical park. It began as a historical site, then they changed the designation some years ago. But that one's already out. That came out in, I don't even remember, 3-4 years ago. So that one can be found online, on my website. You can buy it at the gift shop here at Weir Farm.
What would you say to someone who is in their career right now who wants to take a swing in a different direction, wants to do something else, they're not happy, kind of?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I have encountered two philosophies about that. My philosophy was always have a backup plan, because you got to eat, you got to pay your bills, so you got to have some kind of a job. So then the trick is to find a job that is not going to occupy all your time. The job I had, even though it was supposed to be 40 hours a week, if you leave it up to them, you're there 50, 60, 70 hours a week, you know, and they don't even pay extra for it either. So that's part of the trick, you know, and also something where you don't go home with your job, in the sense that you have so much responsibility that when you do go home and you pursue whatever it is your true passion is, your mind is not clear because you're thinking about all these things you got to do. So that's part of it. But when I was in the music industry, there were some executives from record companies, and one of them in particular, I'm trying to remember who it was, I think he worked at Sony Records, if I remember correctly. But his philosophy was the opposite. He said, if there's something you want to do, just do it. Just take a risk, because he says by having the pressure of not knowing where your next meal is going to come from, that forces you to be focused and to figure a way to reach the goal that you're trying to achieve in your art, or whatever it is that you want to do.
Would you consider him a friend?
Yeah, in fact, he is a friend of mine. I think he's since passed away. I haven't had some contact with him since I got into photography. But he was a very well-known executive at Sony and many other record companies, worked with almost every major celebrity you can think of. And back in those days, I used to do this is before the internet. So before the internet, people actually got together as a group, and we would meet every month in Greenwich Village. I rented out a space. Sometimes I'd have upwards of 100 people there every month. And I would invite these major music industry personalities to come speak on a topic that people can learn from. So it was a way to get up-and-coming artists to get situated in their career. I would do a showcase with a new band or a new singer. I gave away prizes. I would also speak. I would cover some legal issues. And then there would be networking. So I did this every month for several years. So I knew him well enough where I invited him to speak, and he did a really great job on it. In fact, there might be a video on it on YouTube. I don't remember if I uploaded his video or not. But there were several people who had that philosophy. You just go for broke and just take your chances with it.
I think that's good advice.
It is, and I think it makes sense, especially if you're younger. Because if you're younger and you're not married and you don't have children and you don't really have any ties, you can take those risks, you can take those tumbles, and you can recover from them more easily. If you're older, which was, you know, my situation, by the time I made the change, you know, then you have a house, you got a mortgage to pay for, you have children, you have a spouse, you got other things. So it becomes harder, and I think for that reason, that was why I took the route of trying to pursue some kind of occupation that produced some income, but also didn't rule my life, so that I can still pursue, you know, what I wanted to do. Now the benefit there though was, see, everything has a pro and a con to it. If I had done it younger, yes, I had fewer ties and I could have taken the risk, but I also would have very little experience, not just in the field that I want to pursue, but just how the world works. Being older, especially having been a lawyer, I didn't have the same flexibility, but I was a lot smarter about how to do things, because I know how the world works, and I know sometimes it doesn't work very well. And so you have to be like really on top of things. I mean, just basic stuff, like if you have a meeting, you show up early, you know, you're always well prepared. You try to anticipate everything can go wrong and try to manage it. Those are things that when I was younger, I just assumed that someone said, I'm going to meet you at, you know, such and such a time and such a place 2 weeks from now. I figured they'd be there. Why do I have to remind them? And then I realized, oh, it doesn't work that way. People do forget. So just silly little things like that, but you learn it from experience.
Right. With everything, like your whole path is really interesting. What do you think, you know, you have for the future with the gallery in Germany to the books that you're writing? How do you kind of think your path forward looks? Continuing your art, sending photos in, going to New York, kind of what looks like the path for the future?
Well, I definitely want to do more books. I really, really like writing. I did a lot of that as a lawyer. When I was in law school, I was the editor-in-chief of International Law Journal, and I really just love that whole process. I definitely want to do more of that. And so I'm hoping that this publisher will continue on that way. With the gallery, my goal is to get all these different pieces working together in some way. So I want to continue photographing different national parks. I want to keep doing more books. I want to do the gallery exhibitions. And somehow it all coalesces where it can rise up to a higher level. So I've been very fortunate that I have had exhibits at museums, but those are really hard to come by. Because again, I'm not dead and I'm not super famous. And also there are there's some corners in the art world that still struggle with the idea of photography being an art form. So it depends on age. You know, if they're older people, maybe they just don't see that yet. But I would love to be able to do more museums, something on a grander scale. And quite frankly, you know, I want to be on television more. And what I mean, and not because I want to be some celebrity, but I really enjoy talking about this. And I think that art, in addition to being something that can be entertaining and decorative and pretty and aesthetic and all that, it's also a gateway to learning about things in a much easier way. You know, like instead of getting into a big debate, a big political heated debate, you know, I could just talk about George Washington and just state what happened and what are the facts and what was the example he set as president of the United States, the very first one. Not just president, but also the leader of the Revolutionary War, and someone who voluntarily stepped away from power, not once but twice. First as the commander-in-chief of the Continental Army, and then secondly as president, and also voluntarily chose not to run for a third term, and also resisted the suggestion by I think it was another Army general, if I remember correctly, that he be the King of America. You know, so we can talk about that, and I can take pictures of George Washington's birthplace, and just, this is what happened. I mean, don't yell at me. This is what happened, you know, and how you want to take that, well, I don't know. Maybe that's something to provoke some thought in people. And so I can do that through photography, and that's why I want to go to a bigger stage, if you will, a museum. I can do that through books, but also I can do that through talks, which I do many talks at different organizations. But again, if I can get on television, I can reach a bigger audience. There's social media, which is good. It reaches a different audience, and so I try to be active with that.
I was just going to ask you, is there, for people who want to find your art, do you have a website that you can say the whole link, or an Instagram handle or something?
Sure. The best place to see my work is really at my headquarters, which is going to be my website. Social media I love, but all it takes is for some billionaire to change the logarithm, or to close it down, or to change the direction of it, and then you're beat. So I don't want anybody controlling me, so I have my own website. My website is www.xiomaro.com, which is Xiomaro.com. And so not all of my work is up there, because I'm still uploading things, but a lot of it is. But you can also find me on Instagram, Facebook, of course. I'm not as active now on X, Twitter, whatever it's called nowadays, as I used to be. But I do have a presence there. And there's also a lot of smaller ones that a lot of people don't know about. There's one called Blue Sky, which a lot of people are starting to discover now. It's like an alternative to Twitter, X, whatever you are now. There's another one called Cara, C-A-R-A. And a lot of these are really, and Vero, V-E-R-O. And a lot of these are really cool because they're very specific audiences that tend to be more arts oriented. So sometimes I get more activity there than I would on Instagram. And my name, look, my name is kind of crazy. So if you type that in, X-I-O-M, like Mary, A-R-O, you're either going to find me. I think there's some gamer that has that name, but I had it first. And then I don't think it's there anymore, but for a long time I was competing with a stud horse in Chicago named Xiomaro. But I beat the horse. So I think I'm going to come up in the top of all the searches now.
There you go. That's good.
And is there anything that you kind of want to share with us or add anything at all that you want to say?
Yeah, you can find me on YouTube as well. And if you're into music, I do have some music videos. I laugh because some of the videos are kind of wacky. You probably won't even like them, but if you're curious, I do have some music videos up there. So I'm still active with music. I just do it more for myself. I use it almost as a journal where I just do music about things that I experienced. So that's why it's a little bit crazy. But it's also a great way for me to experiment because I use my own footage, my own photography, but I use a lot of stock pictures as well and stock photography, you know, public domain information. So, it just gives me a way to stretch. You know, I think it's really important for artists to not get into a rut and to do things that are different and stretch out and experiment, because you never know how that bleeds into other things that you do. So for me, the music is just as critical as the photography, and it's where I began, so I still do that. But other than that, you asked some very good questions, I have to say.
What's your YouTube handle?
Oh, my YouTube handle is Xiomaro, and it might be Art Studio. But again, if you just type in Xiomaro, it's either going to be me or this gamer or the horse. So it's only 3 choices, and I'm not the horse. So yeah, it's Xiomaro Art Studio, one of those combinations. I think in Instagram it's Art Studio, if I remember right.
Evan, do you think I covered everything? Is there anything anything else?
Yeah, maybe you have a question that we didn't think about.
What's like when you answer this? Keep looking at her. But like,
Sure.
I'm sure like you make it look easy, but I'm sure it wasn't always easy. So like, what's the one thing or maybe a couple things that kept you going through this long process for you?
Yeah, some of it's personality. I am by nature very stubborn, very aggressive, and relentless. I guess that's why I went into law. So that helps out. But also it's having a good foundation. So, you know, I have a supportive spouse, and that's important. You know, not all significant others are supportive. And so I think that was really critical. And, you know, I have a financial base. I'm not by any means wealthy, but I'm also not impoverished. So if I need to buy something, you know, I'm prudent, and I try to make those choices carefully. I make sure, do I really, really need this? Because, you know, cameras are like toys. I can buy them endlessly, you know. But I think that's what kind of helps keep the drive going. And also, quite frankly, I mean, I know this is going to sound terrible, so I hope I don't offend anybody, but I'm sure I will. In a way, cancer was the best thing that ever happened to me, you know, because it grabs you by the lapels and you're faced with your mortality. We were always kind of aware of it, but also we kind of shunt it aside because we don't really want to think about it. But when you're going, you know, for surgery and they're putting the anesthesia, I remember thinking, well, I'm going to close my eyes and this might be the last time. And the last person I see is not my wife, it's the anesthesiologist. And he's saying to me, oh, so you're a musician, huh? And he's just having a conversation and I'm just blacking out. So, you know, those are experiences you don't forget. And so I'm very aware of time. And as I read about like Gene Hackman, I mean, he was 93, so he's way older than me, but like, you know, these are guys I kind of grew up with, watching in movies and all that. It's kind of shocking, even though he was 93, to know that he died. So I'm always getting these reminders whenever some rock star or some celebrity dies. And so I'm thinking to myself, you know, I can't assume there's going to be a tomorrow. There may not be. Even if I don't get cancer again, although that could happen, you know, I can step into the street and a truck can go by and boom, that's it. Anything can happen. I can get assaulted. I could be in the middle, I could be in the wrong place in the wrong time and I get shot or something. So, so I'm very aware that time is limited. And so when I wake up in the morning, you know, I just get right to it and I try not to waste time. And, you know, if I spend time with somebody, I make sure that it's something I really want to do, that it's enjoyable, that it's a piece that goes to the next thing. Doesn't mean you can't blow off time, because that's important too. When you blow off time, it actually is a creative moment. Many songs I've written when I'm driving in my car, all in my head, from beginning to end. I know exactly how it's going to sound like. I just got to go into the studio and do it. Or I'm showering. So when you're doing things that are mundane, if you're engaged, you could still make use of that. But all those things, there's no one thing, but all of them together, I think, helps drive. And that's why it's important to know what you really want to do. I encounter so many people, especially when I was a lawyer, representing clients who wanted to do something artistic. Many of them, what they really like about art is their romanticized idea of what it's like, which is usually not real. So for them, they're thinking about all the good stuff, like the museum openings, when they get an interview like what I'm doing now with you, right? All that fun stuff. But they don't realize those moments are far and few between. Most of the work day to day is just grinding it out. It's doing emails, it's doing research, it's fixing problems that didn't, your printer doesn't work all of a sudden, now you got to scramble. I mean, it's all these dull things. And so when they encounter that, then they stop and they go, maybe I'll spend the weekend watching a movie or going to a barbecue or going to the beach or traveling somewhere instead of working and doing their art. So I treat it like a job, and I'll put in at least 10 hours a day, if not more, 7 days a week, So again, that's part of the drive. If it's something you really, really, really want to do, it becomes self-motivating. No one has to prod you. You just do it because you almost can't help yourself.
Would you kind of give that piece of advice to university students, just what you just said? I feel like
Oh, absolutely. In fact, and I'm going to offer this. If your school ever wants me to speak to a group, I'm more than happy to do it, because I've done those before. And if someone did that for me when I was in college, it would have been really, really helpful. But yes, when you're in college, I would do that. In fact, now one of the things that I did do a little bit of, but not as much, is I would network within your own group. Because you don't know who's going to be where 10 years from now. It could be the one kid in class that nobody really likes. But if that person succeeds, they may be the one who offers you a job or a career. So you really want to network, laterally. Because you see, what used to happen when I was working with young artists, they always wanted to network and do business with people that were way above them. And it's not going to happen. They're older, they don't take them seriously. I think you're just some dumb kid, They have a different lifestyle. And also they're kind of out of it in a way. They're old enough, So you want to be with the cutting edge, hipper crowd, which is your own generation. And you're all more or less equal. There might be some inequality. There might be some kid who grew up with a silver spoon in his mouth, and so he has access you don't have. But for the most part, you're mostly going to be in the same level. So the thing is, once you graduate, you're not going to see many of those people again unless you make it a point to stay in touch. Now, alumni associations try to do that, but I don't know how successful those are. But you can do that yourself, and it's so easy now with social media. When I was growing up, that stuff didn't exist. So once you walked out the last day of school, that's it. You don't see them again. But everybody, with what you're doing, with STN2, every single person, whether it's a freshman to a senior, whoever they are, you get their information, you hook up with them, on Facebook and all that stuff, but you stay active with it. Don't just have them as a friend to collect, so you have a lot of numbers there to show. But that, I think, is really important. And that's I don't even know if people really address that very much. But that I would really focus on, because then you pool your resources. And that's the other thing too. This is probably before your time. But the Beatles were the biggest group in the world at one time. They still are, I guess. And Lennon and McCartney, the two main musicians, were competitive with each other in terms of writing songs, but it was competitive in a friendly way. right? So it wasn't like we were enemies. And I think a lot of people don't fully understand that or take advantage of that idea. So with your classmates, you're all going to be competitive. You're going after the same jobs and opportunities, but you want to do that in a friendly way. So if you don't get a job, but you kind of had, you know who needs to be contacted at a certain place to get an interview, why not share that with somebody? You know, if you do that, and you got to be careful who you share it with, but now they owe you something. And I'm not talking about that in a transactional way, which is the big thing now in Washington, D.C., but I just mean that in a good-hearted way. You know, they did you a good turn, so now they're going to look out for you, and when you need some help with something, they'll help you back. And I know that works. It doesn't always work very well, but when I started my law practice representing musicians, I had no clients, I had no experience, I had nothing. And so I had to start from the very beginning. And what I did was I used to go to all the nightclubs and hang out and meet people. And even if they didn't become a client of mine, they didn't give me any money, if there was an opportunity I can swing their direction through some other networking I did, you know, I would do it. If I felt they were worthy of it, if I felt they were talented enough and it made sense for them. And sometimes it'd work out for them, sometimes it wouldn't. But now we've developed a relationship, and they may never use me as a lawyer, but sometimes they will refer other people to me, and then that helped me out. And so there are many people like that who were never clients, but we had that kind of a relationship. Now, of course, there's always going to be people who take advantage of it. So they take, and never give back. And unfortunately, that's just part of the cost of doing business. You can't really avoid it. But you know, if they do that, then that's to their loss. You don't help them out in return anymore. But that's the kind of thing I would do early on. And also, I would network a lot. You know, like I would just go to things. Like instead of just hanging out with your friends, bring all your friends together and go to an event, a social event that's related to your field that you want to get into. And then you break it all up. So what you do is you say, okay, I'll give you an example. Although I'm talking a lot now, in reality, I'm actually a very shy person. And it's really difficult for me to just talk to somebody, you know, just make conversation. I have friends of mine who are geniuses at that. They could talk to anybody and anything. So what I would do is I would just be strategic with it. I would just say, well, we'll all go together. Some people just gravitate towards me for whatever reason, and a conversation strikes up. But you, my friend, since you're good at making friends with anybody, you go out there and we just split up. And then at the end of the night, we share our contacts, all the business cards we collect. Or we introduce one person to the other, you see? So I used to do that all the time, especially in the nightclubs. So I would get these guest passes to go to different events. And then I would just invite different people for different reasons, strategic mostly. And say, you know, you can all come, or even just somebody who I just felt, I just didn't want to go alone, like some loser, you know, and I'm there by myself, you know. So I said, just come with me and just keep me company, you know. But those are things that are not talked about, like especially like in placement offices. Because if you submit a resume, right, especially nowadays, you're submitting a resume along with hundreds of other people. It's all getting processed through AI or some other lazy thing because nobody wants to bother reading it anymore, you know? And so you don't know if and you have to do it a certain way with certain keywords and all these little games people play. And sometimes what it really comes down to is just meeting someone in person and just having a chemistry there where they feel like this is somebody I could work with. You know, they're pleasant, you know, they're well dressed, they're polite, they seem knowledgeable. That's something you can't convey in a resume. So that's how I think you can get over on that. Now, it's not always going to work, but if you try all those things, that helps, going back to the original question, to keep the drive going so you can get to your goal. It applies not just to art, it applies to anything. So anyway, I diverged a lot.
I think you covered everything, honestly.
It's like a seminar.
If you want to take his mic, I think,
We're good.
yeah, I think if you want to take his mic, I think we